restoration has begun in the land of the living.
Shalom and welcome to the Heartland Connection. This is Zach Waller, the Executive Director of Hayuvel, your host, coming to you guys straight from the Heartland of Israel. It's been a really big week. We've had 130 folks poured in for the harvest from 6 different countries. We have people from the U.S., from Canada, from Bulgaria, from Sweden, Latvia, and Colombia. So this is super exciting to see the nations pouring into Israel to take part in the prophetic fulfillment of 3,000-year-old prophecies. So everybody here is super excited. There's just so much energy and purpose, and it's just such an amazing feeling to be inviting all these people in, getting them to their housing, and then getting out to the field and seeing all the different people from all the different countries really connecting to the land and understanding the realities of what are going on here is such an amazing thing. So we have officially kicked off harvest season 2017. We've also this week entered into the biblical calendar month of Elul, which is basically last month was the month of Av, and it's really a sober time. We have the 9th of Av, and it's kind of a season of remembering the tragedies that have happened. It's a very somber, sober time. And then Elul is a very special month, and it's kind of like this in-between month. Where we have the feast coming up, but Elul, they say, is actually related to the cities of refuge. I was reading an article. I don't have time to go into it a whole lot, but I was reading this article that talked about how the month of Elul could be related to a city of refuge. Basically, the month of Elul is a city of refuge in time. And there's a whole big study on that I don't have time to get into, but I encourage you to go check that out and look it up. The month of Elul is supposed to be a month where they say the king is in the field. It's a time where the king comes down, speaking of God, of course, comes down from his heavenly throne and actually goes out and meets his subjects in the field. He actually gets out in the field with the members of his kingdom, and it's a time where you can get really close to God and relate to him. So there's a lot of thoughts behind that, and I would encourage you to go and look it up. It's very interesting Jewish thoughts and biblical depth to a lot of it, so I'd encourage you to study it out. This week we are in portion Shoftim in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 18 through chapter 21, verse 9. And Shoftim means judges. And we start this portion off there in chapter 16, verse 18, and it says, judges and officers shall you appoint in all your cities. And so basically saying, okay, you need a judge, you need somebody who is appointed as a lawmaker, somebody who comes up with righteous judgment, somebody who knows and can decide, discerning enough to decide, okay, yes, this is right, this is wrong. And then you need officers, you need police officers, basically, somebody who can go and enforce the law. As I was studying this portion, the first thing I thought of was, I think our American Western culture is very opposed to judges and rules and laws, and it's really an interesting thing. I've been kind of pondering on this and thinking, why are we so it just makes us uncomfortable. We have this, a lot of people, I've heard a lot of people talk, say, well, I don't want to be judged. Don't judge me. Don't look at me and think you know something about me. Don't judge me. I'm okay. I'm fine. And even if I'm not, it's not your job. And of course, there is some biblical basis to that kind of thing. Don't judge that you be not judged or whatever. But what's going on here? I mean, right here in starting off the portion, it says you should appoint somebody to judge you. And I think, just on a surface level, it's like, okay, there's something here that I think we're missing. That, if God commanded it, then it's positive, it's good, it's holy, it's righteous, it's needed. And so what is this? So I really want to dig into this and just talk about judges and officers and this concept of why they're needed and what we may be missing out on in Western culture. Because I think for a lot of us, there's kind of that surface level, like, I feel like that person thinks I should be something that I'm not, and so I feel judged. It's really not very deep. It's kind of just, like I said, surface level, and just kind of makes you uncomfortable. Maybe you avoid the person a little bit if you really think that they think that. It's kind of funny. It's definitely one of those things where it's like you think that they think that he thinks that she thinks that they thought. It's definitely not very deep and mature, but it happens, right? We all do it. And then there's kind of the deeper level of, where it actually is real, it's serious, and you really feel this thing from somebody, and a lot of times it's not even true. You feel like a person thinks something about you, or you feel like, you really feel judged. And I think, a lot of this probably stems from our Western culture just not wanting to be controlled, right? We want to be the ones who decide. We want to be the ones who control the situation. We want to know that, nobody else needs to be in my business. Nobody else needs to, be pushing me around. I know what I think, and I can do whatever I want. And so don't judge me. And, I'm a good person. I'm trying to do whatever. So there's kind of this anti-accountability, this anti need to be open and honest and to really be vulnerable to other people. It's like this feeling like, I don't have to be vulnerable, so I'm not going to be vulnerable, and it makes me uncomfortable, so I don't want to do this. But I really think it's imperative. I think it's very important for us to get past this feeling. I think it's important for us to be accountable. It's important for us to be vulnerable with each other. That's what relationships are built off of, is one person recognizing that he needs somebody else, and that person recognizing that they need him, and then making each other vulnerable and and judging each other in a good way, not judging each other like, hey, you're bad and I can see that and I don't like that. It's like, no, I when I look at you and I judge you, I say, yes, God made you. There's a good judgment. There's a true judgment, right? God created you for destiny and a purpose, and that is true. That is an accurate judgment of your friend or brother or whoever it is. So I think somehow we need to get past this unwillingness to be vulnerable and be vulnerable with each other, talk to each other, discuss things, and get down deep. And I think if we actually do that, we'll uncover some real beauty and real depth to relationships. And we'll actually find out that a lot of these things we thought were lies. The person never thought that about you. You never thought that about the other person, that it's actually just something that the enemy used to get in and throw these thoughts in your mind to try to knock you off track and try to keep you from having a relationship with the other person. So that's kind of the negative side of judging and trying to turn it back around. But I want to go to another place with this whole judges thing, because we have the scripture that also says, don't add to the Torah, right? It says, let's see, you shall not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I commanded you. This is earlier in Deuteronomy in chapter 4. So here we have in Deuteronomy chapter 4, you shall not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it. But then now we have Moshe saying, you need judges. Now, this, of course, begs the question, why would you need a judge if you're not going to add anything to the Torah? Why do you need a judge if the Torah is everything you need? I mean, if we go down in chapter 17 in this week's portion in verse 9, it says, "And you shall come to the priests, the Levites, and to the judge that in those days, and inquire of them, and they shall pronounce upon you the sentence of judgment. You shall do according to the sentence which they pronounce upon you in that place which the Lord chooses, and you shall be careful to do according to all that they order you, according to the sentence of the law in which they instruct you, according to the judgment which they tell you, you shall do. You shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left from the sentence which they pronounce upon you. Now, the man who acts presumptuously and will not heed the priest who stands to minister there before the Lord your God, or the judge, that man shall die. So you shall put away from the evil from Israel, and all the people shall hear and fear and no longer act presumptuously." So this is like serious. This is like listen to the judge or die. Like, these guys are very important, and it's crucial that the nation of Israel has judges that people can listen to. And if they don't, then it's capital punishment. All right, so this is a big deal. So how do we make sense of this then? Now, back to the original question. One scripture says don't add to it, and then we say, okay, if you have a situation that comes up, you're going to make a new law, a new judgment, right? So what's the difference? Well, how come the one says don't add and the other says you need judges to add to the law? I think this is part of the reason why a lot of people have a lot of trouble with the Jewish people and their laws that they've come up with, because they have taken laws like, remember Shabbat, and then they make a lot of what they call fences around it. And they determine, because they had a situation where somebody came up to somebody and they said, hey, can we do this? And so they had to decide, okay, can they do this? Can they not do this? And that's what, a midrash is. It's just a documentation of two rabbis getting together and hashing out certain Torah commandment law, and then they come to their conclusions. And some of the conclusions are different. They don't even come to the same conclusions. But there are laws that are being determined by the judges. And they're clarifying different laws. And so I think it's really important for us to realize, and I think with a lot of the Messianic community to realize, that this act that the rabbis and the sages of Israel have done is actually a biblical thing. They were the judges. They were the people who are supposed to come up with and be the judges for Israel. And according to the Torah right here, it says that people are supposed to listen and obey these judges' verdict. Obviously, if something is against the Torah, if a judge comes and says you should do against it, what we read in last week's Torah portion about that type of situation, if somebody's leading you astray. But it's kind of funny, because I've heard a lot of people say, well, I don't read the Talmud or any of these biblical commentaries or anything like that, because I believe that you shouldn't add or take away from the Torah, and these guys have built up a lot of commandments. So I think it's really important for us to look at this scripture and realize that it is actually a biblical thing for there to be a judge who decides and makes laws. And it's just the reality of the situation in the United States. We have police officers who uphold laws that aren't necessarily, straight out of the Bible. They had to add laws, speed limit, whatever the things are. It's not in the Torah. It's not in the Bible. Obviously a lot of the laws are built based off of the Bible. Just the same thing with a lot of these rabbinical things. So I think it's important for us to do that. And it's one way that we can maybe find these places of anti-Semitism within our heart, because if the question is, okay, why were we so quick to say, oh, those rabbis are bad? Is it because we actually have a legitimate reason, or is it because we are anti-Semitic and we hate rabbis? Seriously, we need to ask ourselves these questions. After 2,000 years of horrible, horrendous history, we need to ask ourselves some serious questions and find out, are we just anti-Jewish? Are we racist against the Jewish people? Or do we really have a biblical reason why we think what we think? And do we jump to conclusions because we're bent a certain direction? It's an important question we need to ask. I ran across a really interesting article just talking about the differences between American, judge, jury type setup, and then a Beit Din, which is a Jewish court system, which I didn't even realize this, but the Jewish court is actually different. And even in countries, this article I was looking at is actually from Australia. It's actually against certain rabbinical authority and against the Jewish custom in Judaism to go with a secular court. So they have actually courts set up called the Beit Din, which is a Jewish court system that are actually inside these countries. And so I read this article by Alicia Greenbaum called Here Comes the Judge. This was on a Chabad website, chabad.org. And it was just talking about the difference between the two. And he says, as I understood it from the legal perspective, in the standard Anglo-Saxon judiciary, the role of a judge is to decide the merits of a case based solely on the evidence presented in court. If one of the parties or their advocates fail to pursue a certain line of question or forget to present a piece of evidence, no matter how potentially crucial to their cause, the judge is expected to sit quietly in place without interfering. The judge who spoke at the course went to great pains. Okay, he's talking about this course that they went to. He went to great pains to impress upon us that they saw themselves as disinterested umpires, as far removed from the process as possible. So it's like this: you're trying not to take sides, you're backed way up out of the situation, and you're only going off of the evidence that's being presented. The Dayan, the Beit Din type of setup, still maintains neutrality and remains fully objective, but his primary responsibility is to ascertain the truth. In contrast, the primary role of a Dayan, rabbinic judge, in a Beit Din is to determine the truth. To this end, a Dayan will often cross-examine witnesses, do his own research, call for the parties to address topics that he feels relevant, and generally insert himself into the process to the fullest extent that he feels necessary. It is a difference between an observer and a truth seeker. The Dayan still maintains neutrality and remains fully objective, but his primary responsibility is to ascertain the truth. So I just thought that was a really interesting difference between the two court systems. One really interesting verse on this in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 26. It's talking about the future redemption. And it says, I will return your judges as at first and your counselors as at the beginning. So here in Deuteronomy, we see judges and officers. But in this passage in Isaiah, it says your judges and your counselors. So it's a little bit different situation, a little bit different word. So police officers, they're supposed to enforce the law, right? Whereas counselors, they're more like teaching the law, right? They're counseling. They're telling people, no, you shouldn't do this, you should do that. So it's interesting that in the redemption, when everything is, when Messiah comes and returns to Jerusalem, sets up his kingdom, then we won't have to have police officers. We'll just have to have counselors, because everybody will want to and have the Torah written on their hearts and want to obey and follow his command. So that was really interesting and something to look forward to in the future redemption. And it's really interesting to look at even in the New Testament what we see Yeshua saying and doing in reference to this kind of judge thought. When he talks about the Pharisees, the rabbinic rulers of that day, what does he say about them? He says, do as they say, but not as they do. This is a pretty big deal, right? Here we have Yeshua talking about the Pharisaical, the rabbinical system, which we know was corrupted at that time. And so they weren't acting holy, right? They weren't acting righteous according to the Torah. But he says, do as they say. So basically Yeshua is saying, these guys are the judges. These guys are the guys you need to listen to at this time and follow what they say. This is very, important. So he's saying, do as they say. We have, even when Yeshua was crucified, when he was brought before the high priest, right? He says, why did you revile the high priest? And he's like, oh, if I had known that it was the high priest, I wouldn't have done that or whatever. So even then, he's like showing respect to the guy who's about to be crucified, because he knows this is the judge. This is the person that's in charge right now, and I need to respect his judgment. We have the story in John chapter 8 about the woman caught in adultery. We can see an example here of how Yeshua judges. Again, he's looking at somebody's heart. He's looking at their potential, and he's saying, okay, no one here condemn you, and go and sin no more. Moving on to the Torah portion, we have talks about the king, and how this is basically like the highest judge of the land, right? It's the king, and how he has to be humble. And I found this really interesting article by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And he talks about how the king has to write a Torah for himself, right? It says he must read it all the days of his life so that he will be God-fearing and never break Torah law. But there's another reason also, so that he will not begin to feel superior to his brethren. So his heart be not haughty over his brothers. The king had to have humility. The highest in the land should not feel himself to be the highest in the land. He had to be humble. But he went on to say these were symptoms, but not the cause. The cause was the feeling on the part of the king that since he is above the people, he is above the law. As the rabbi said, Solomon, King Shlomo, justified his breach of these prohibitions by saying, the only reason that a king may not accumulate wives is that they will not lead his heart astray. So I will marry many wives and not let my heart be led astray. And since the only reason not to have many horses is not to establish links with Egypt, I will have many horses but not do business with Egypt. In both cases, he fell into the trap of which the Torah had warned. Solomon's wives did lead his heart astray, and his horses were imported from Egypt. The arrogance of power is its downfall. It's a really, really amazing article. I was really learning a lot from this. He goes on to say, the model is Moshe, described in the Torah as very humble, more so than any person on the face of the earth. Humble here does not mean diffident, meek, self-abasing, timid, bashful, demure, or lacking in self-confidence. Moshe was none of these. It means honoring others and regarding them as important, no less important than you are. It does not mean holding yourself low. It means holding other people high. He talked about a queen. He told this really amazing story of this queen who took time to meet with Holocaust survivors. And he said it was just an amazing thing how this took place. The queen, went one after the other, and the survivors were coming to the queen in like a trance. And they said, 60 years ago, I did not know whether I would be alive tomorrow, and here I am today talking to the queen. And the article says it brought a kind of blessed closure into deeply lacerated lives. 60 years earlier, they had been treated in Germany, Austria, Poland, and in fact in most of Europe as subhuman. Yet now the queen was treating them as if each were a visiting head of state. That was humility, not holding yourself low, but holding others high. And where you find humility, there you will find greatness. There's a really just powerful story of how, because I think sometimes we have this like false humility that we're like, oh yeah, I'm nothing, I'm just lowly, poor, and we don't see that with Moshe and Moses, and we know that he was the meekest, humblest man on earth, right? So it's not about knocking yourself down, talking yourself down, trying to have this false sense of humility. It's about bringing others up, lifting other people's high. One more passage I want to hit here in chapter 20, verse 5. It talks about a couple of different categories that don't go out to war. It says, what man is there who has built a new house? And what man is there who has planted a vineyard? And let's see, what man is there who is betrothed to a woman and has not married her? All three of these categories are supposed to go and not be a part of the battle, right? They're supposed to remain at home. And so my thought was, and I read a really cool article from Aleph Beta about this, and they were talking about how these three things are things that you would aspire to do, and something that is more important. You're settling the land, you're building, and these things are like important things in life that give you purpose, and more important than fighting in the battle. So that was really amazing. All right, I think that's it for this week. Thank you guys for listening. Be sure to hit that share button. Shabbat Shalom from the beautiful, exceedingly good land of Israel.
Restoration.